There is no birdsong this morning, no voice above a whisper. The wind moves low along the plain, but the grass does not stir. Out past the ridgelines, where the hills harden to dust and burnt husks, something glows, faintly, like fire without smoke. But it is too far to be fire. And it has not grown. It only stays. The villagers have not yet fled, but they do not boil water. They do not sweep their doorframes. They do not speak the calendar's name. Most do not know what they are fearing. Still they wait. There have been no riders here. No sightings. Not even a lost merchant to bring stories from Samarkand or rumors out of Bokhara. Only wind. Only that same strange pressure, felt across the backs of the legs, or behind the teeth when water is drawn too quickly from a well. And then the children start speaking. Not crying, not screaming, but whispering, sometimes repeating each other, sometimes not. A small boy stands alone with his back to the doorway and says simply, "He's already behind us." No one tells him who. He could not know. And his mother does not ask. She shuts the door before evening. The fields go untended the next day. There is no law against work. No curfew. Nothing declared in writing or passed down by Saddlehorn. But the oxen shake. The eldest son's hands blister without cause. And the well begins to taste like ash. 7 mornings go by like this. A merchant caravan approaches the village outskirts, silk banners trailing behind in peacock green, copper chains dangling from the velvet sleeves. Their guards wear no armor. There is no need. This is not a war zone. There has been no invasion, no siege. And yet, when the merchant sees the faces along the rooftops, sees the smoke from no fires, measures the stillness of prayer cloths that should dance in wind, he turns back. Quietly, without asking. He trades nothing. He leaves the goods on the road, untouched. The villagers will not pick them up. That night, a woman is heard crying behind a mosque, her tears silent, but punctuated by the sound of cloth being torn and buried. A grieving ritual, though no one has died. That will come later. The first bird to collapse is a crow, not struck, not wounded. It simply drops into the main courtyard of the saffron merchant's house, and its eyes dry white. His daughter finds it just before dawn. A midwife is blamed. She is taken ill for weeks. She mutters things in sleep, names that do not belong to the village, surnames formed in dialects no one has spoken in 3 generations. Some start to believe she is the door through which something has entered. One night, someone walls up her window with salt. But the sickness spreads to those who placed it, and the salt vanishes by morning. 12 days have passed now. Still no army. Still no threat. Still no cause. Families begin to whisper one thing they've already chosen. No proof. Only the feeling, as if death has become less random, more selective, ruled by unseen logic or old debts unpaid. A boy won't step onto the western road, saying it breathes at night. A letter from a cousin in a shaper mentions cotton traders going pale after hearing a name shouted by no voice. She doesn't write the name. Her ink runs out before the letter completes. The courier wrapped it in linen, claiming the paper kept sweating, as if still alive. The shepherd dogs stopped barking. That's when the traders, the ones with silver lances and northern stirrups, come crossing into the province. They aren't Mongols. Not yet. These are scouts. Men gathering grain prices, listing orchard yields, collecting burial counts. Their language is rough, but their gestures gentle. They smile often. They do not threaten. But breath carries backwards when they speak. So soft, so ordinary. Yet the youngest among them wears an amber charm, smooth-sided, carved with goat's blood ink, and when an elder in the village comments on it, the man hands it over and never asks for anything in return. 2 days later, the almond tree at the village center blooms despite the frost, and 5 goats miscarry without noise. Still no army, no clamor, no clashing steel, no banners, no death. But dread has a schedule. At the edge of province after province, people walk strange now, slower, more inward. Governors burn their account books. Merchant guilds stop collecting dues. One minor prince converts suddenly to 3 religions in the same week, lest one of them be correct. He stops speaking, does not eat. Elsewhere, woodcutters say they hear voices beneath snow crusts. When they dig, they find nothing, but back at home the dates on their betrothal documents have changed. It has not begun, and already something has been deeply altered. The day the Mongols finally come, the wind is slow. The sun is clean. The mountain shows no sign of ill omen. They do not arrive with screams or scattered riders or snorting horses. They come quiet. More men than any foot could count. All organized, patient, silent. The banners do not wave. They stay still as carved marble. There is no warning shot. No demand for terms. The gates of the city open from the inside, and no one can say who unlocked them. Not one living soul claims it. Not the guards. Not the priests. Not even the boy who was seen last near the rope hatch. A feather floats out on the wind. The crows do not return. By the time the city of Merv is taken, no word escapes. No bird returns. No rider reaches the next town. No refugee survives the sand. It is said that the water in their aqueducts ran heavy with clay for 3 days, then turned sharp like wine. And still, no witness. Not one scroll, no record etched on clay, no merchant's ledger retrieved from the ash. Nothing written remains. And yet, the rulers in the Shaper soon discuss it openly at court. A butcher in Kazvin tells it to his apprentice. A widow in Ray mouths one name again and again before sleep. Malik, 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 the general who burned inside his own prayer hall. It should be impossible. But everyone knows. Stories reach Shiraz before they travel roads. They arrive not by tongue but weight. Men know the sounds before the names. They say the sky reddened over the Kapadag at noon, and that the smell of iron reached them through linen bags. There is no source, no message. But those who hear the story fall cold along the spine, even those who never once laid eyes on the eastern desert, even those born after. One tale is always told first. A bathhouse worker in a bark, barely 15, tells his mother he dreamed of a wall made of flesh, bodies stacked higher than torches could light. In his dream, the fire licks upward, but finds no smoke. The bodies do not burn. The tower lives inside the boy's mind. He never saw a Mongol. He lives 300 leagues from Merv. His mother cuts off her braid before dawn. She tells the neighbors his spirit has been touched. A morning rite begins, but no one's certain who is dead. Another story arrives, not by messenger or decree, but sewn into a carpet. It is a trader's gift, supposedly from Gurganj, or one of the lesser oases. Too finely woven for so desolate a port, too recent a dye to have dried so quickly. The seller cannot recall where it was taken, nor who handed it to him. But the thread bears a deep maroon swirl along its edge, a pattern unfamiliar to the master weavers. A visiting monk lays it gently against packed clay floor. He touches one looping shape and says, "This stitch is a name." He will not speak it aloud. The next morning, he is missing. The carpet remains. Days later, it is burned, though not by anyone who admits doing so. The ash leaves no mark on the floor. Nothing will grow there now. Fear has a rhythm, but not always a reason. Within a week, the water sellers in the Shaper begin to lower their buckets twice, even when they're full. The surplus water is offered to someone, though they leave no cup. The market towns further west board up city doors before sunset. No guards posted. Just a thin scrap of ochre dyed to look like a blood moon hanging from the lintel. In Qum, a blacksmith refuses a stranger's coin. He says the currency flickered. Nothing else. It flickered. That stranger vanishes into the cotton fields an hour later, leaving no step nor dust behind. Soon after, the blacksmith begins to paint his fingers blue in the mornings. Not dye paint. He says it protects the names of his father's sisters. He never had sisters, someone says. He tells them, "I didn't." But they are remembered. Merv is gone. But the silence says too much. Some claim the wells there overflowed with teeth. Others say the walls were coated in something soft, not flesh, not cloth, but prayer skin, a term not found in any text. No one can define it. Still, when the rumor is told, men go quiet. Even mullahs avert their eyes. The Khanate releases no record. No proclamation is made. In fact, the destruction of Merv is not attributed in any Mongol letter for nearly a generation. The first mention comes only in 1258, in passing, sourced indirectly through a Chinese envoy's observation. He writes of the city like one speaks of an old omen. It is referred to as already cursed. And yet, even without knowing how or by whom, people speak as if they had seen it. They describe the slaughter, the fire, the towers of heads, the bleaching pits outside the northern gate. Some even describe the scent that came after it rained. The contradictions multiply. A surviving cartographer sketches two versions of the city, one before, one now. Neither shows the river path correctly. One overlapping trader route crosses itself where no bridge exists. The Islamic Waqf registrar from Araga confesses that two separate inventory scrolls from Merv's bazaars list traders who never existed, or never lived long enough to be counted twice. In Bokhara, old men leave honey jars deep in the mosque shadow to ward off something unseen. They say honey soothes the ghosts, keeps them clean-smelling. It is not in the Quran, but neither is what follows. A man opens his storehouse to recover a copper engraving. He finds it covered in animal prints, small paws, as if painted by a ferret or fox. But there are no animals within. Later that week, the grain turns less dense. Entire sacks feel full, but weigh as feathers. He seals the door and never returns. The silence of that storehouse becomes a map. Children dare each other to stand near it. No one wins. A traveler writes down what he's heard. He is Persian, passing under Mongol permission toward the valley routes near Ghazni. His scroll, preserved in partial fragments, describes a tale from a shepherd who claims the following: that the men and women of Merv stood still as the army entered, still not by sword, but from something they heard. A voice, he says, not a scream, not an order. A single word, repeated 4 times, from a woman without eyes, standing above the west gate. The shepherd describes her robes not in color, but in texture, like old dust, scabbed and hung between grave markers. According to him, the Mongols did not touch her, but marched past, untouched. And only after they passed did the slaughter begin. The word she spoke is not recorded. The ink breaks. Still, the rumor spreads that the Mongols have priests, but not readers. That they carry tales from town to town not to repeat them, but to implant them. One must hear, not understand. A curious fear without shape, a sense of being known before being seen. That even in prayer, even in silence, someone has already reached ahead of the self, folded your name between pages not yet written. The siege ends. The grave tallies never arrive. But even in Baghdad, a clerk refuses to write the city's name on import orders. He shortens it. He crosses the R, ends it MEV. When asked why, he says the name won't hold still. No one survived. And yet, the story continues. It has been told in pantomimes, relayed in multiple dialects whose speakers never met, echoed in children's rhymes that name no army but always end with a falling fire. There is no eyewitness left. And somehow, everyone remembers. The priest first speaks of the vision after waking fully clothed beside the temple granary floor, his hair soaked, his hands blistered, tongue cracked at both sides as if he'd tasted a hot iron. No one had noticed him leave his chambers. There had been no storm that night, and the door was locked from within. Still, he swears he saw a figure. Not in a dream. In the antechamber. Near the brazier. Wearing silk too heavy for the spring. The smoke from the oil lamp did not cling to the robes. It parted like breath around snow. He could not see a face. But when the figure turned, he saw a sigil burned into the fabric. Not stitched, not dyed, burned in, as if by memory itself. He draws the symbol in broken charcoal. A circle with a cleft to the west. One of the temple guards recognizes it from a storage wall sealed during the failed harvest long ago. The record on that sigil is clear. It belonged to a northern general. He died 10 years ago, in the lands of the Dzungar people, chest crushed by a whitewood beam during the Battle of Chagan Lake. His body was cremated, his ashes scattered. But the cloak is here. The figure is walking, or has walked, through bulk. The high monks seal the granary. Sand is spread across the floor. Guards are posted. The priest is moved to a separate room, given barley broth and soft clay to sleep beside, a comfort right for those called spirit-marked. Still, something rustles at dusk. Not an animal. Not a cloak. A shift in hearing, that deep sense all broken cities eventually develop, the moment of sound not known, only felt. The next morning, a priest vanishes. No sign of struggle. No crack in the wall. But every oil lamp in the eastern quarter burns low, even unlit ones, and one line of bricks near the temple's base is slick with dew, though no rainfall came. The head monk refuses to enter the east wing again, ever. In Samarkand, a court scribe copies a letter of warning. Its destination, the palace quarter outside Talas, near the low southern slope where rumors say Mongol scouts were seen in late spring. The letter warns no names, only mentions movements. But before sealing it, the scribe notices something unsettling, the words beneath his own handwriting. Faint, charred into the parchment. Not ink, not ash, between fibers of the page itself. It is the same phrase, repeated 4 times, across 4 different languages: Arabic, Chagatai, Judeo-Persian, and Tangut script, each one meaning the same thing. He waits. The scribe does not weep. He folds the leaf, seals it, writes no name. But when the courier delivers the scroll, 2 weeks later and across hostile ground, the recipient is already dead, throat crushed by falling beam. Same manner, same angle as the northern general. And the wax on the scroll bears his insignia. But that cannot be, because the scroll was written after his death was first recorded, and sealed 300 leagues from where he was last seen alive. Still this symbol appears. A grain marker in Gurganj has it scrawled in dust, pressed into a sealed vat of vinegar found spilled but untouched. A veil left hanging in Isfahan's market matches the woven pattern, though the dyes haven't been sold in that region for years. A girl carving patterns into bread dough is pulled aside by her mother, not for defacing food, but for mimicking an old sigil that no one taught her. She says she saw it, on the wall, in the dark, above her bed frame, where no pain has reached since the house was built. And then come the dreams. They do not yell. They do not torment. They do not announce. But across Balkh, Ghazni, Mer's ruins, and the length of the Hizr Masjid, men and women begin waking with details that glue together like wax pressed from different molds. Each dream slightly different. Each sleep soft. Yet the body rises as if it has marched. Most remember a man with only one hand, not wounded, not severed, simply one limb where 2 should be. The other missing without sign. He walks through silk, but leaves no gust. Some say he speaks. Some say he bleeds tears. Some say he doesn't face them at all. He points towards something never shown. And every dream reports this detail. The air smells like old bronze. Not blood, not fire, but bronze too long buried and suddenly scrubbed clean. These dreams gather into a rumor, and rumor folds into certainty. They're not soldiers. Many begin to whisper. These are not men on horses, coming with famine and iron. These are memories, stitched into the hide of men, ghosts before dying, forms that carry not stories after, but stories before. It is said the Mongols walk with their ancestors stitched behind their eyes, that when they look upon a city, they already see it burnt. A soldier in Nishapur claims he heard the laughter of his grandmother from a Mongol scout, not a likeness, not a pattern of speech, but her full laughter exact in tempo, as if drawn from inside the man's ribcage. No one believes him, but he never returns to his post. He is later seen wearing a borrowed robe, wandering toward the salt plains, muttering the same phrase as the scribe's parchment. He waits. A scholar, frightened, tries to map the similarities. He notes dream reports across regions, concludes perhaps there is folklore being deliberately planted, an early campaign of psychological deception. But then he uncovers something darker. One phrase in the Book of Kings, a stanza rarely quoted, where hoof fell once in silence. Their breath returns in armor's shape. No one recalls reading it before. But there it is, not inked in later margins, not interpolated. Stamped in the original copper leaf. Older than the Mongols. Older than Chinggis. A line about ghosts who ride forward to remember slaughter, not begin it. He closes the manuscript. He burns it before dawn. And then, south of Nishapur, just beyond the terraced olive groves, an entire orchard goes quiet. Not one fruit falls. Not one leaf wilts. The wind ceases for 3 days. Light softens at the wrong hours. A man-built canal develops frost beneath it. And there seen just once, a cloaked figure, moving slowly through the trees, unmoving in body, just gliding like pushed from another slope. He turns. No face, but over his chest a mark. A sigil. And then, wind again. The trees begin to rot that week, and no one harvests the fruit. The city nearby locks its eastern gate for 6 months. No caravans, no tribute, no letters, trade halts. They are not under siege, not by army, not by court, not even by threat. But silence clings like wet fur, because whatever that figure was, it was not sent. It walked, and it has walked elsewhere too. And it does not walk alone. He does not scream when it happens. He only stops walking. Just north of Ray, where the soil clings in copper tones and the olive presses ache from constant use, a herdsman is taking his goats across the lower valley. He is younger than he looks, hard in the shoulders, soft in the throat, and he is singing a love song. By the second verse, he goes quiet, then still. His goats do not see it, but he does. A tree blooms. That morning, mid-frost, early in sun month. The almond tree, nearest the salt well. Its bark should be asleep, twisted, quiet, leafless. But one almond flower dangles, full petal, full color, dew already gathered on its tip. That bloom should not exist. And from that moment forward, each step he takes is a mistake. Ray is an old place, settled long before the faiths crawled westward, long before the Samanids stitched their kings into carpets and fire temples were rearranged into more proper shapes. History hardens in this city like breath in the stone. For weeks, the people there have felt something wrong, and they've said nothing, because nothing has happened. There have been no scouts, no horses seen on plateau or pass, no Mongol spear glint caught on distant ridges, only that uneasy quiet, the kind that lingers in the bottom of the bowl when the cook forgets the salt. And now the tree, a single blossom, artificial in its color, not bruised, like out-of-season petals often appear, but rich, too rich. By sundown, the herdsman is ill. His goats scatter from his voice. When he lies down, he tastes copper behind his teeth. That night, he dreams of fire, but not flame. Only its smell and the faint sound of someone walking on dry grass. Whoever walks breathes in a looped rhythm. Not quite human. Not quite near. He wakes, digs a narrow trench outside his house, and buries the shirt he wore that morning. 3 days later, 8 horses die. Not in battle. Not from bolt or blade. They collapse in stalls in shadow, all under shelter. Their mouths streaked with a thin filament of dried foam. A veterinarian, summoned from Kazvin, cuts one open. He finds an almond, whole inside the stomach lining, dried and rotted, and wrapped in a fold of goat hide. No one can explain it. The city governor doesn't request an investigation. Instead, he orders his own stable doors bolted shut and sends 3 riders to purchase silk veils from the market, black, unworked, for himself and his sons. One detail is remembered by all. In the hours just before the horses collapse, the market street cracks. A single jagged line appears in front of the perfume shop, faint at first, then audible as a groaning, as if the paving itself rejects something below. The crack opens wide enough to rattle the pewter shelves. but bizarrely closes by nightfall, and no one agrees what was seen in the opening. One child claims a second crack, deeper beneath the first. Someone else whispers of a fragment of cloth caught on a smooth-rooted branch down there. But there are no trees growing beneath stone. The governor sends no workers to examine it. He orders a copper plate nailed to the paving, then has the perfume shop moved west, away from the temple lane. No explanation given, not even to the imam. A midwife refuses to handle salt. She begins wearing gloves around her own child. When asked why, she answers only, it remembers who touched it last. 3 households report cats refusing to drink water from their copper dishes, even after scrubbing. A slab near the eastern gate develops an odd sweet scent when struck by sunlight. Stone should not give off scent. At first, these are just isolated happenings. Children misbehaving, women muttering, a fever or two. But then a traveler returns from the south, shaken and barefoot. He does not carry his goods. He leaves them behind in Qom without payment. Why? He tells one story. It is brief. Almost nothing. He says another village, a lambda 5 days west, woke one morning to every tree bent forward at the root. Not cut, not windblown, just bent, as if in bowing. All in the same direction, all facing west, and beneath each trunk, a single depression in the soil, the same shape, as though someone had stood beneath every tree, looking east, waiting. Those indentations, shallow, thumb length, he says, reminded him of footprints, but too smooth, too undone, like whoever pressed them melted into the ground instead of stepping on it. He says no one would speak. The elders were gathering pots of water and leaving them around a village, whispering Talmudic chants and Zoroastrian fire rites mixed together, like confused apology. He walked 3 more leagues, cast off his sandals, and refused to carry coin home. No one stops him. When others search for a lambda, the paths wind differently. One merchant swears the road has grown longer. Another claims it loops back. No caravan finds the village. Only the smell of wet ash, even in the dry month. And then come the scraps. Letters, left and signed, dropped at the feet of vendors. Found slipped under taxed heads of garlic, beneath grain sacks, inside prayer leaves. No signature. No wax seal. All written by different hands. But the wording is the same. If it flowers without season, do not eat the fruit. Do not pick it. Do not wander toward its shade. The roots remember. The soil was paid. We travel in air, but rest below. Some believe it's code. Others believe it's song. But an old man sitting cross-legged on the roof near the grain market murmurs, "No bird wrote this." A passing boy laughs. The man replies, "When men are afraid, trees begin to lie. For all this, still no army. Still no siege horns. Still no enforcement. No banner bearers. No decree. But people are moving. Not the shepherds. Not the camel lords. Not the daughters of trade. No, the tax recorders. They are the first to flee. Without notice, the ledger keepers for the nearby silk ports begin falsifying numbers. Goods uncounted, weights changed, value diminished lower than ever seen. Then they vanish. Under moon, under cover, with silence. Even the Mongols notice. But they do not punish. No messengers are sent. Instead, at the edge of the orchard near Ray, a single red flag is laid across the branch of a dead tree. Its cloth is held in place with a fruit pit. One season too early. Nobody touches it. 2 weeks later, the price of salt triples. Fear has entered the grain. Not through weapon. Not through hoof. Through roots. It is known now. The wind changes. The birds drift north. The hounds wait at the wrong door. And somewhere in a field outside Ray, the almond tree, the one, the first, still blooms. Its branches whisper inward like fingers above a pulse. And at night, when no one looks directly, the petals sometimes twitch, as if they're trying to speak. It is a small scrap of shoulder bone. Camel, flattened and sanded smooth, its edges delicately blackened. Too deliberate to be from fire. Too clean. It arrives with no bear. No satchel. No cord. Just found, lying beside the blacksmith's threshold in Termit. One morning, before the call to prayer. Before any shoe touches the earth. At first, it's mistaken for trash. A charmed fragment left by wandering tribes. But then the blacksmith's mother reads the inscription, faint, etched not by ink but shallow blade marks, strokes dug low as if written in hesitation. Not a message. Not a law. An order. 6 words. All nouns. No verbs. Each naming materials. Wood, water, ash, flower, gate, and body. It makes no sense. No date. No location. Only the Mongol seal burned onto the bottom edge, unmistakable, the circle of flame binding a broken arrowhead, a known omen from the house of Ogdi. But Ogdi is months from this region. Letters from him are slow. Beside them, always a courier's name, always a command chain. This is none. The seal is right, but the hand is missing. A local cleric refuses to read it aloud. Says the noun pattern matches a divination form abandoned by the Tangut 70 years before. Used once, they say, for naming night-birthing demons when midwives would still speak to the roof. He begs the blacksmith to bury it. It is not buried. It is copied. Within a fortnight, more bone remains are found, not in piles, not from battle. Just single blanks, scapula, rib fragments, shoulder corners, curved and chipped, each bearing one line of strange, clipped language. Never full sentences. Always these draining staccato inscriptions, the kind meant to imprint, not persuade. In Herat, smoke before breast. In Sabzevar, drinkless mouth turns east. In Kandahar, open gate, veiled jaw, white cord. They come with no name, no courier, no payment. Still, each one achieves what decrees often fail to do. Commanders change patrols. Salt taxes halt. A caravan diverges. And in one instance, a captain turns his men to the east slope road, citing sign from above. None disobey. 3 days later, the pass behind them catches fire. The fleeing townspeople say they saw smoke coming from under the snow. This is how the Mongols begin to move unseen, not only by conquest or threat, but command without speaker. Orders drifting into spaces one should not question. And those who speak the orders often disappear. In Balkh, one baker finds a small bone on his windowsill, says nothing, reads not a word, but draws the symbols from memory into the flour on his shop's rear table. The next day, a noblewoman stops her caravan to inspect the bread. She eats none. She weeps, claims a name has been hidden inside her for years. One no one alive has ever spoken. That night, the oven collapses into the floor. The baker is found standing silent in his shed, flourless, bleeding from inside the ears. A single coin rests in his hand. On it, no mint. Only the broken arrow sigil, pressed as if melted into poured silver. But it's not real silver. It's goat bone ash compressed in wax. There is a pattern in this, now, but none that feels human. Not letters, not language. Something older before script, the desire to be obeyed without knowing why. Whole command chains begin moving without sender. An outpost in Nisa retrofits its walls to align westward, though their only threat lies north. When asked who issued the change, the captain claims he found the plan nailed with a thorn to the underside of the salt cart's axle. That plan, no ink, only scorch marks and thin diagonal scratches barely visible underwater. Its seal was pressed into raw cloth, not wax. A seal never seen before, triple lines in concentric curl, as if a spiral forgotten mid-dream. Documents arrived, but not where they should. A scribe in Isfahan inventories in Amir's stores. Halfway through the count, he finds a grain tally already written, in his own hand, his own ink. His own mnemonic markings, but dated 2 days ahead. He swears he never wrote it. He burns it. 12 hours later, it reappears in the registry pile, untouched by ash. Witnesses fear to speak now. But confessions are drawn out with small gifts, little tokens left near mosque entrances, carved from pressed paper sheet bearing trilingual inscriptions. He who disobeys the mouthless script will be tasted alive. That's all it says. Still, it's enough. A caravan reroutes itself without confirmation. Entire patrol routes shift toward dried riverbeds. A fortress gate is unbolted 2 hours before enemy signal. Not from warning. From a single disc of horn found pinned beneath the barracks banner. Its surface? Unmarked. Only smooth warmth. Like it had once been alive. Even language begins to vanish. Words once used to confirm written orders fall out of use. Command, dispatch, edit, revise, these disappear from court records. Replaced, surreptitiously, with gentler turns. Received, given, was known. Court clerks begin adopting a tense not taught by any schoolman. The act without actor. The mouth without tongue. Official scribes stop using their seals. They send scrolls unsigned, bearing only dates and weight. Some testimonies are not written but rubbed from stone, like bruises on polished marble. One chronicler keeps track of when scribe names disappear. A pattern emerges. Wherever the broken arrow seal appears, names vanish within 3 weeks. Not deaths, not erasures, just untethered. Scrolls recite line after line of decree with no author. Orders passive, executed with no clear target. Who signed it? Who sent it? Who hears them? It is never said. But the seal remains. A single monk begins archiving copies of papers before they're lost. He notices something terrifying. The more faithfully he copies these order bones, the less resemblance they bear to his own work, as if the source is ebbing backward, pulling language out of his memory as it transfers shape. By the 5th scroll, he no longer speaks aloud when transcribing. By the 7th, the quill moves without his command. By the 9th, the ink refuses to dry. He stops, turns away, seals what he has written in layers of wrapped date parchment. He buries the sealed records beneath the grave dust of a disused stable shrine. He marks the burial with no rock, and vanishes. Elsewhere, a general draws a pattern in dirt outside his camp before sleep. A habitual act, a meditation, the thing his grandfather taught him, to honor footsteps and routes. Except this time, when he draws, the shape completes itself. He made 5 lines, but 10 lie before him, outlining a fortress unknown to him, a layout learned, not remembered. He retreats in 3 days, without battle. When asked why, he says, there was already command. Someone marched me. No one questions him. 3 weeks later, Mongol scouts enter unopposed, and when they set foot in a city square, the arrow seals are already burned into the floor stones. Done months before. No one knows by whom. It does not stop. A captain sharpens his blade and finds someone else's name engraved on the steel. His own father's name, carved before the man ever served willingly. A daughter unrolls a road map baked into horsehide. The rivers mapped don't match the ones outside until 2 years pass, and then they suddenly do. Scrolls become hazard. Paper becomes message even when blank. Ink takes on age too quickly. And yet, still no screams. Still no generals boasting. Still no clamor of demand. Only command. Unspoken, unsigned, followed. Because something has already chosen how the war will move. And the war has no author. The fields are empty long before the army arrives. Not trampled, not pillaged, but abandoned in a slow, deliberate way, as if the harvesters were called home early by something not voiced, not named, only felt. Outside Bedtime, wheat withers while still green. The wind shifts in circles. Birds veer off before crossing the hills. A caravan of meat sellers diverts itself to the southern gorge without being told. One man can barely explain why. I smell thread, he says. Just thread. Just there. They stretch the tents one by one, on a ridge just beyond the visible line of earth. No banners. No fires. The ground is not even flattened for sleep. Just the canvas. Pale-throated wool, dyed once with vinegar and crushed bark. Not Mongol script on the side, not Tamga. Nothing claimed, but they form a pattern. Not a circle, not a camp. They are placed wide apart, as if something larger will occupy the air between them. At night they hum, not sound precisely, not music, just the sense of resonance, like a jug left open near wind. One soldier swears the noise matches a rhythm his mother hummed when dying. Another sits bolt upright and asks who spoke her name, though no one had. A Kyrgyz mule handler burns dry lizard tongues around his tent ropes to keep motionless sleep. An old Turkman says he feels watched only when his back is to the mountain, never when he faces it. When morning comes, the grass below the tents is smoother. Not pressed smooth, shaved, combed outward by no visible hand. On the other side of the ridge, just 3 valleys away, a village empties itself. There is no force present, no threat, no law read aloud. The women begin to gather clothes at midday. The old men refuse clay cups. The youngest child, who has never traveled, packs shoes not belonging to her. By dusk, every door is shut. By dawn, every threshold carries smoke left over from an unlit lamp. And one phrase, marked in ash, not ink. We could not close the air. One chieftain sends runners by starlight. What they find sickens them. The ridge is still quiet, but one of the tents has disappeared. No footprints, no markings, only a white groove in the soil, not deep, just visible, like a removal, as if it was never meant to stay. No one hears the Mongols speak in these camps. Tales travel that their soldiers rest without whisper, that the guards outside only move when no one is looking straight. One traveler says he watched 3 men on horseback arrive near a well, then stand in place all night. They never dismounted. They never turned away. By morning, a bird had died above their heads in flight. To touch these tents is forbidden, not by command, by instinct. Even the goats will not graze within sight of the pale ropes that anchor them. A furrier loses one of his children. She is found shell-eyed, crouched near the fabric skin, her hand brushing the bottom corner. Her fingers are quiet red, but not cut, mouths dry near them. Scribes refuse to ink orders within 20 steps. Even the air near the edge of the tents begins to warp small gestures. The jug tips in calm breeze, but doesn't fall in the direction pushed. A horse refuses water from a stream after standing watch beside the tent valley. That night, it tears at its own flank before sprinting into flatland without rain. The stream itself turns slightly alkaline. No salt nearby. Nothing upstream explains it. And then, a rusted vial is found beside one of the anchoring stones. Inside, cloth wound around a small bone. Not human. Not deer. Something in between. The cloth bears no seal, but when unfurled, it emits a scent of dried milk and vinegar. And for one instant, the air shifts. All color flattens, just for a breath, then returns. A tax caravan meant to bring tribute halts outside the second ridge. One of the porters goes ahead to scout routes. Within 30 steps of the tents, his tongue begins to curl backward, not in speech, not in heat, in recall. He returns barefoot, vomits blood twisted with feathergrass, says one thing before unconsciousness. There was a name between the cloth. It slept. He does not wake. They bury him in sand and offer no marker. He will not be mourned, only silenced. From this point on, cities begin to retreat from rumors alone. Letters arrive with no opening ceremony. Merchants trade by proxy, sending goods with blindfolded runners. Nightfire terraces are doused 1 hour before heat's full turn. Even Muslim prayer halls begin echoing oddly, as if each worshiper hears their own voice repeating a second late. The air learns its own rhythm apart from theirs. And still, no siege, no assault, no ambassadors bearing threat. Just tents, unmarked, uncounted, placed and replaced. One disappears every 8 nights. Another appears exactly 46 steps southeast. And always That same residue of humming. Occasionally, the scent of hot leather. Occasionally, the wrong shadow. Occasionally, the same sentence on lips not moving. We have always been here. A Hilgar draws his sword one night. He swears he saw his brother inside a tent. But his brother died last winter of salt fever and was burned. There was no body. He does not speak for 5 days after. And when he does, it is only the name of their family well, repeated aloud 8 times, as if calling fish. His sword rusts overnight. By high summer, the Khwarezmid court receives the first formal report of what the peasants already know. Entire hamlets fleeing before tents are pitched. Cities pre-cleared. Populations unaccounted for. Migrations without record. But the Khan does not answer. Because the courier who brought this report brought nothing in his hands. He spoke the words unbidden, then fell, and bled from ears and nose. Inside his mouth, petal, not tongue, not cloth, only dried almond flour, single, twisted sideways. He tastes of burnt resin, and when buried, the grave gives off a sound, faint, almost like air pressed through pipe. No one digs again. It is now said in sworn secrecy that the Mongols do not announce their war through messengers. They arrive first in air. They alter breath. They alter memory. A woman in a border town swears she can't remember her child's name after hearing one of the tents rustle. The child is still present, but he no longer prays in correct posture. His mouth always half open, as if speaking to wind. Long before the hooves arrive, terror does. Not through knives, not through arrows, but through the rearrangement of silence. Men begin obeying absences. Bands of warriors disband without word. Salt piles remain untouched in winter, and the first Mongol soldiers ride into cities already open, already soft. They nod politely to guards who bow unarmed, and in one case the tent is folded up. But the humming remains, even after it's gone. The air sings where it once was, and it does not forget. On the 9th day after the barley harvest, a woman named Nargis hears hooves in the upper road above Anjurkin. Not galloping, but drifting, steady, too regular to be wind-blown stone, too exact to be the long roll of thunder that sometimes folds over the hills after sunset. She is not alone. Her neighbors hear it too. One by one they step from threshing houses and clay sheds with the same expression. Not fear, but surprise. They wait in silence, not speaking. They stand still as if expecting an animal to emerge, just one. Nothing passes. The hooves continue. They move over ground that should be dry trembling with each impact, but the soil is not disturbed. The almond dust on the ridge holds its powder. The dust is completely still. 3 of the elders whisper prayers while leaning out over their fences. Someone suggests hiding the young, but no weapon has been seen, and still no rider. The hooves continue at the same pace for another hour, then slowly fade. When the sound vanishes, the birds begin returning to the far trees. But for 3 days after, the sheep won't step toward the road. Their eyes drift toward nothing as if watching a shape that cannot be seen in daylight. People begin walking differently. Not away from the sound, but around it, careful not to look directly up along the ridge where nothing appeared. Even when carrying water or tending to vines, their paths curve slightly, creating a perimeter around a road that shows no pockmark, no grain shift. A new trail is formed out of avoidance, not command. Some deny it was ever heard. They choose this version aloud, but never without closing their windows first. One boy laughs when telling the story to a neighbor's son and mimics the hoofs. The rhythm is too perfect. The other boy begins shaking before it's finished. He falls into shallow fever for 2 days and refuses to sleep indoors again. No name is told to account for what they heard. No official arrives. There is no warning from the court in Nishapur, nor any directive from Khiva. The grain tithes go uncollected that week. For once, no one asks why. 15 leagues east, in narrow pass housing a remote Sufi enclave, a gate opens without knock. Brother Karim, who holds the key, does not know he opened it. He had left the bolt lashed as usual in the evenings, chanting in whispered vowels as generations have done before him. There had been no sign of intrusion, no scuff or scratch, only the slow movement of the arched door creaking wide. Nothing visible waits beyond it. In the morning, the hoof prints appear. Only 4. Just 4 inside the courtyard, pressed clearly into gravel. No entry trail, no approach path, and none leading out. The ground is dry. Any step should have left a track beyond the gate. But none do. The marks begin and end in the center of the cloister, where the fig tree droops low over the tiled prayer bench. Each horseshoe print is perfect and silver-edged, as if charred from inside. The tiles quickly dull. After midday prayers, a brother approaches too close to the fig tree and collapses. His garments remain unstained by the dirt. Only his skin has changed when he is lifted, the back of his hands pale beneath the fingers, in the shape of leather reins. He lives, eventually, but his speech never returns. News of these silent arrivals spreads, not through letters, but through postures, through eyes not meeting, through watered wine left at doorsteps for no visitor, through fathers insisting doors be opened only by mothers and only during light. In certain villages, young girls bind their feet in red cloth to avoid the attention of anything without sound. In medicine markets, healers begin mixing copper-tinted saffron into their poultices. No one explains the origins, but changes take hold. A merchant from Herat recounts a strange encounter during a brief visit to Mayana. He says that in a courtyard near the silk bazaar, a single Mongol appeared. He wore no armor and sat atop a horse so calm it did not blink while standing beneath harsh sun. The merchant walked past him once, stopped after 15 paces, turned, and saw nothing. Both man and horse were gone. But in that moment, the merchant says, something changed in his balance. He describes it not as dizziness, but as the moment a word dissolves from one's mouth mid-prayer. He went on to forget his father's name for a full day, and only recovered the memory when walking barefoot through wheat. Weeks later, still unsure if he'd dream it, he awoke to letters carved into the wooden latch of his storehouse. 6 shapes, rough and deep, foreign in stroke but not entirely unfamiliar, marks half-matching the pronunciation of his mother's old lullabies. He does not translate them aloud, but when his assistant gestures to erase them, he shouts and orders him away. The merchant begins sleeping behind the counter after that, not from fear, but because no one will enter if he's not already there. And his customers no longer knock. They arrive exactly when the door opens, without sound. By autumn, Khwarezm control over local garrisons begins to waver. There is no rebellion, no invasion force, but men go missing from posts. Watchtowers post rotations that no one seems to fulfill. One unit stationed in a border town awakens to find fresh orders already written and recorded in the pulse log, with dates matching future sun cycles. The writing is correct. The name's correct. But no scribe signed them. The commander burns the page. He is found 2 days later, unharmed, but with his tent facing a different direction. No one moved it. And the footprints around the structure suggest only one pair of boots. But they circle the tent more times than humanly possible without rest. The guards go silent. And now strange gestures begin to spread between regions that have no contact. In the mountain keeps, children begin stacking river rocks in sets of 4. Always 4. Always left near thresholds. When questioned, they say it keeps the fast horses away. But they do not mean fast in speed. They correct the words softly. Fast in breath. In plateau villages nearer to Persia's western road, shopkeepers who had once clanged bells to announce entrance now whisper greetings before unhooking the door. Not out of courtesy, but because the wind has begun repeating things. Too precisely. One fishmonger tells his wife he heard her voice spoken back to him from beyond the curtains when she was still outside. They move. They do not speak of the place again. Others are not afraid of the horses, but of what rides them. In Kazvin, a blind rope maker tells a story to a man with a ledger book and a blistered cheek. He describes a rider with a face made of brass cracks, as if molded and broken again before drying. The beast he rode gave off no scent, but his breath bent the smell of onion, even from 5 cells away. He speaks of the ghost hoof, a shape not in flesh, but in noise. How when it moves, it drags prayers sideways. That some horses hold grief in their rib cages. That the Mongols whisper not to the animals' ears, but into the space where previous names lived. No one corrects him. The man with the ledger never repeats the tale. Instead, he stops writing names on municipal taxes and simply records each family as unfigured. When the Mongol columns finally come, they travel with speed but without sound. Not stealth. Something more unnatural. Old villagers say they hear the thunder of hooves before dawn, but then step outside to find no dust, no cloud, no trace. All breath stills. A minute passes, then 5, then an hour. And only then does the first horse come into view. Orderly, saddled, silent. Then 2, then 40, then more. Riders in ranks too tidy for terrain. Faces uncovered. Some are boys, some elder. All bare-chinned, all watching straight ahead. The sound does not match the motion. Never a gallop. Always a drone. As if the earth had learned their names long before they stepped onto it. On the 12th evening of Hazaran, just beyond the western courtyard of Ardistan's oldest Kanka, a spice merchant arrives with cracked heels and traces of lapis dye beneath both thumbnails. His name is Yusuf, though he stops stating it after the second city. He carries no trunk. Only one scroll. He does not keep it hidden. It is tied in green cloth, bluntly, not like a sacred text, and its width betrays its oddness to any trained eye. Too long for trade inventory, too short for legal enclosure, too narrow for Quranic calligraphy. He says he received it outside the Iskandar Pass from a woman who did not speak. Or rather who did, but whose words produced no sound. He describes her mouth as closed but vibrating, like a pot lid before boil. Yusuf does not open it in Ardistan. He leaves it at the foot of a mosque post, halfway inclined, half bound. It disappears the next morning. But somehow, the words inside begin showing up elsewhere, in places where he has not traveled, in hands that cannot write, on surfaces where ink should not hold. In Bokhara, an elderly rabbi receives a letter from a cousin in Ray. Sparse, the usual barter report. But at the base of the parchment, trailing upward from empty page, are 7 lines of unfamiliar script, written in such faint ink that they resist the eye unless tipped toward heat. They describe a siege that did not take place, a hill that burned before being named, a tower of fruitless prayer, a woman whose voice was filled with feathers. The cousin denies penning it. He says the paper came that way. The rabbi wraps the letter in salt cloth and does not open it again. In Marvalrud, a brickmaker's son is found drawing lines on the floor with a dried reed. When questioned, he says they are directions. A path through doors made of rain. There is no such path in their home. An uncle accuses him of copying Mongol signals. The boy refuses to eat for 3 days. On the 4th, he recites 32 words without pause. All verbs. All in the imperative. He cannot write. No one taught him these forms. He is taken to the local Qadi for cleansing. A teacher listens from behind a door and writes out the words in secret. Later, comparing them to scrolls kept in the temple annex, he finds 5 of them scripture-wrapped. Fragments from Babel era spells practiced in Mesopotamia under the Akkadians. The rest, no match. The words float between prayer and poison, commands without direction. He adds them to a slate, writing only beyond figured grammar. The scroll itself, Yusuf's original, appears again a year later in Erzurum. By then, Yusuf has vanished. It is known only by rumor. Antiquarians describe it differently. One calls it a genealogy of cities that were never built. Another says it is a history of ancestors who have not died yet, written from the end of time backwards. A poet refers to it simply as a cold, fruited map of tears not shed in the correct order. Whatever it contains, no two who see it report the same length. One man says it held 3 verses. Another says 12. A monk says he turned the page 6 times. A sister says there was no end. And none can say when it began. In Tabriz, a copy appears on goatskin. The goatskin is traced not with ink, but bruising, pale blue shapes that appear only at dawn. The stonemason wakes to find it beneath his pillow after dreaming of hoofbeats that stop mid-prayer. The shapes match the bone lettering described 3 counties away. He tries memorizing the sequence, but afterward he cannot recall the shape of his first wife's signature. When questioned by elders, he weeps at the way they say the word ink. He claims it sounds wrong in their mouths now, like trying to swallow a road. He digs into the stone with his fingers until they break. From this moment, a pattern begins to reveal itself. Copies of the scroll, or forms of it, echoes of it, move in no obedience to terrain or rule. They appear in palimpsests, in falcon feathers, in reverse-pressed wax forms mistaken for coin molds, in lilac-stained laundry woven into drying lines. In some cases, they replace paid contracts. One house sells 10 hectares, notarized lawfully. 3 months later, the agreement lists no sellers, just a sequence of names, each unknown to the buyer. The land grows nothing. When asked, the buyer murmurs, "This was written over." Governors near the Caspian begin banning trade scrolls longer than 6 lines. The edict is ignored. Scribes in Nishaper begin fastening page ends to brass rings surrounded with prayer-dyed rope, uncuttable. They call this pinning the silence. But no one explains what the silence is. A pairing appears in Sari. 2 carts carrying separate spice shipments drop their cargo after a wheel breaks. On each, a wrapped leather case, clearly not meant for sale, unlabeled. Inside, the same scroll. Twice. Scribes gather. They read both line by line. The first copy begins with a calendar sequence marking a storm that never occurred. The second, same scribal hand, same vocabulary, opens with an obituary. The name belongs to a child who is still alive. Both scrolls match until point 41. After that, complete divergence. Ink blots begin to mimic seals from unreachable cities. Mid-sentence, the left scroll shifts dialect. The right begins repeating one phrase, ashen ink, until the scroll runs out. On the back of one scroll, the feather of a bird never seen is lodged beneath the final bead of binding thread. Its blood is still red. A scroll enters the medical archive of Kazvin. It is misfiled under recipes for tranquil breath. A student is made to copy it as a penmanship exercise. He finishes the assignment in silence, rolls the page, lays his quill down. He sleeps 2 full days. Upon waking, he cannot walk straight. He does not look at the floor where the scroll had rested. He claims the page came from one of the Mongol camps, though no courier was logged. He can recite 6 lines from memory, but loses hearing in his left ear after the second recital. What alarms the elders most is not the content of the scroll, but what is missing from the boy's speech. He no longer uses the passive voice. He only speaks in absolutes. I am here. It was done. He knows. He does not say why he knows. Just that the scroll did not stop. That it cannot. That it was incomplete when he copied it, and that it will remain so. 5 cities now chart sightings. The same script. The same changing text. The same whispered understanding that these are not copies in the true sense, that the scroll does not reproduce, so much as multiply through memory's marrow. That it doesn't change to fit the reader. It changes because the reader has touched it, even unrolled a finger width. One general burns an early version, hidden in a devotional prayer book. He orders ash collected in sealed jars. 3 weeks later, he begins muttering a line no one else reports having read. The jar, unopened, begins vibrating. When lifted, it breaks apart mid-air, releasing no particles. Only sand, faint ink, dried almond, something older than either. So the name it is given, quietly, near Shiraz, north of the silent pastures where old blood still clings to olive roots, is scroll without end. Not because it lacks a final word, but because no one can hold the same scroll twice. No one rolls the same page. Every reading is another history. Every ink line enacts what it erases, and everyone's version tells them something not yet true, but deeply felt. Enough to surrender a city, enough to slaughter without cause, enough to deny what they themselves have seen. Because the scroll doesn't convince. It unfolds, and no mind survives it unchanged. In the spring of 1221, along the edge of the Murghab River basin, a convoy carrying citron bark and dried apricots moves east from the trading post at Dargas. The sun is steady. The wheels hold. By the fourth afternoon, they reach a clearing lined with sweetgrass, and here they make camp, where smoke rises easily and voices carry without distortion. No bird's object. No jackals watch from the dunes. But before the horses are unbridled, one guard halts. He listens, not to sound, but to its lack. The flags atop the caravan poles are swaying leftward, drifting in long unbroken waves toward the western slope. And yet, not one stem of reed below moves the same way. The grass holds still, not heavy from dew, not broken, just unaffected. The cloth breeze, the land does not. He says nothing but keeps standing beside the oxen. And when the camp finishes setting for the night, he digs a shallow line through the earth beneath the reeds. His hands come away dry. The dirt is warm, not from sun, but from within. No one speaks about it the next day, but the caravan veers hard north by unscheduled turn. They purchase a false permit from a border post in Khorasan, using names 2 weeks expired. In doing so, they pass through a route once abandoned due to flooding. Strangely, it is dry now. The trees that once leaned from the erosion ridge stand rigid as if carved from tin. Only one bears leaves, and on that tree there swings a cut piece of crimson cloth nailed into the bark, loose at one end. A child trader tries to retrieve the nail. He collapses within 3 steps of the tree, clutching his shoulder as if struck. There is blood, not from a wound, but from the mouth. And on his tongue are 3 small grains of stone meal, the substance used only by Mongol farriers to maintain hoof integrity under siege conditions. No one says the word omen, but the tree is not touched again. That night, every tent pitched below the ridge collapses twice in still air. No wind. Still twice. Far east of this path, maps begin changing. A cartographer working in the core of Herat draws a line near Samarkand that loops inward at the wrong angle. When corrected by his apprentice, he does not argue. He simply reaches for a different brush and redraws the river path again. But it shifts in the same way. Each time, it curves towards Orange as if pulled, warping alongside cities that never shared borders. When accounting for this with his ledger of past routes, he finds that some of the documented names no longer match their locations. Villages recorded just 5 years earlier have moved 20 miles at most, but their coordinates have been altered by decree. Still sealed. Still signed. But lists rewritten in the same calligraphy using settlement markers that predate every campaign. When he writes to Baghdad, the calendrical professor he consults writes only 2 words in reply, feather script, and nothing more. In several towns to the north, a traveler from Nishapur describes a strange inconsistency along the marshland pastures near Sugdaya. He says there are stretches of earth where water lingers over rock and hoof without evaporation, but casts no reflection. Items dropped will float for minutes, and yet remain bone dry when lifted. His horses, he insists, refused to drink, not from illness or stubbornness, but because they would not recognize the water as real. A scholar tasked with collecting village prayer forms tests the report himself and finds that scripture spoken near the reeds will mirror every second line heard twice in a delayed echo, impossible across open land. He abandons the area. A week later, the settlement vanishes from his reports, not destroyed but subtracted, still existing, still marked, but left unmentioned by its own neighbors. People begin referring to it as an outpost, then as a grove, then not at all. Something new is noticed along the military outposts. The wind that had once driven dust storms through unsecured corridors no longer obscures anything. Instead, it clears before soldiers arrive, laying sand flat like parchment. Men walk over ridges already swept clean of refusal. Archers report arrows flying straighter in these spaces, as if moved by a force that favors completion. Field agents tasked with assessing terrain note that fabric indicators, banners, cloth tabs, siege wind checkers continue to move strongly, but the sails on the boats moored along the Oxus remain slack. Reeds stand vertical. Not a single indica plant bends, even under storm smell. They say it gives the feeling not of stillness, but restraint, that the air, like a tethered ox, is waiting for someone's command not to move forward, but to release everything at once. And though the cavalry receives only practical instructions for routing around the southern slope, no one takes the bend path. They all cut through straight terrain. No orders formally issue this change. It happens twice in the same week, in two different provinces under separate Khwarezmian governors. When news reaches Kunai Urgench of a third, this time across unsuitable clay terrain, there is no inquest, just silence in response. In one hillside apothecary in Kujand, a midwife receives a parcel, wrapped in millet twine inside a cooled clay croft. Inside is a scroll cloth with only one word repeated in descending script, the same word shifting slightly as it changes orientation, nafas. It appears 31 times, translated once as breath, elsewhere as sigh. Next is yielding, later as remnant. The breath, she says, is not human. It is marked inside the paper itself, not by anchor pressure, but by the folding seam, a kind of immaterial grammar. She does not read it aloud. She buries it inside the flue of her oven. Her husband finds her weeks later with her back to the door, and all stones in the courtyard carefully rearranged into forms of converging lines. He crushes them before neighbors can ask. The oven is never used again. By the time the Mongols move into Bajis, cities are already anticipating the heir. Not the army, but the moment they call arrival, a sudden warmth before crossing crow silence, as if someone had asked a question without moving their lips. Gates open before they are touched. Lattice screens between tower fortifications disassemble on their own, already loosened. Grain is removed from rooftops that had no visible stormfall. And when banners of warning are raised by court messengers in advance of known troop movements, they fly in the direction of the nearest open road, leading into the heart of cities that had already been prepared to receive them. In letters written from a religious outpost near Zerend, a visiting scholar describes the experience of scenting the Mongol direction without seeing them, a sharp moment of camphor and rust mid-step on a stone bend in the mountains, followed by a strong humming under the soles of his feet. His hand physically tingled. He called it an echo from beneath walking, not sound, but position reasserting itself. He mentions in that letter that he had spoken no names in hours, but still something had recognized where he was. Exactly. From this point in the campaign, nearly no sieges are required. The Mongol army arrives into spaces already unraveled. Language folds around their movement. Wind favors their direction. Grass tilts only after they pass. And behind them, each city finds new dust on antique tiles, older than the plunder, older than the ash of any fire. Dust already settled, as if they had been there before, and had merely returned to collect the breath that had been held too long. There had not been a shortage of flour in Tabriz, nor firewood, nor yeast, nor clean water. Tar slates on the ovens remained smooth, and traders arrived on time for each weight bundle measured against brass. Every domestic account bore the usual names, grain tithes steadily mixed and paid for in dinar, though sometimes in metal rings from the shaper, which some clerks were now quietly refusing to accept. The ovens had never been empty. The winds from the eastern hills had not yet weighted the valley with ash. The season was well-timed, properly blessed, and according to the calendar drawn in sheet vellum, this was the 7th firing cycle since the new moon, a lucky day, by old standards anew. But when the baker opened the kiln near midday, he did not smell char. He smelled marrow. The spiral groove inside the bread roll was still visibly unbaked along the center binding, and the grain around it had not formed any crust. There was no error of kneading or moisture handling. But something had displaced the dough, something that took its shape from the human mouth. From inside the cotton glove heel of one finished loaf, a curve of bone sat perfectly lodged between folds of undercooked grain. Not loose, just resting, as if it had belonged there. It was a molar, complete with root, clean. The baker lifted it once, stared for a beat, then placed it back down. He closed the oven without sound and covered the kiln mouth in elder cloth. He cleaned no tools that evening. When his wife asked what had happened, he replied that the batch had burned unevenly. This was not true. No one else was there. The next day, he refused to touch sack grain delivered from Ray. When questioned by a steward from the guild, the baker said only this: he had bitten his tongue without moving. 3 times while sleeping. There was blood on his pillow, and a second impression alongside his molars, as if someone else had chewed that night too. No report was filed. The bread was discarded beneath lime. Small things began shifting in the markets, not visibly, but just enough that count keepers had to rewrite morning inventories. Scales were a measure off, even when patches had not changed. Dried chickpeas carried traces of black fibrous threads, thin and string-like, with the texture of wet hair. Some spice packages delivered from the south arrived sealed, but the packaging had loosened from the edges inward as if reopened by steam, though none reported moisture. No mice. No mold. Only that the contents arranged differently. That the rosemary you packed now curled in a spiral when opened. That the barley clumped against the inside of its sack in formations that mimicked jawlines. One man reported finding a shard of brass with punctures along the edge, 5, evenly spaced, the shape of human teeth. But the spacing was too wide to match any known adult. Too strong for children. And no metal once used in his mill. He was told to throw it into the river. He did. But the handle of his grain ladle turned black over the course of 13 days, beginning at the spot he had touched. In the alleys near the butcher quarter, women began pouring broth around thresholds before dawn. This was not for blessings. They did not chant. They did not look up. Several had started binding lemon vine leaves around their fingers, claiming it preserved the flavor of meat from memory. When asked what that meant, a widow muttered something about phrases passed between ovens. She said bread had begun repeating itself. Same slash marks on separate days. Same fold in dough, showing up in different batches. Not recurrence, repetition. Like a gesture remembered too clearly by the flour. The magistrate sent a taulier. He returned with no cause. No sign of ghost work, no foul play, no missing accounts. But at sunset, the man tore pages from his own intake log and fed them into the fire temple's brazier before sliding a single copy to the steward. On it, only one sentence, unlined and without ink marks beyond the center text. Moon bid east. He would not explain the phrase. Underneath the spice pavilion, 2 carts collapsed on the same morning. The stones in the road had not shifted. The wheel beams hadn't snapped. But the carts sank slowly and evenly into pits 5 hand-widths deep where the brick foundation of the street had softened to dust without rain. One wheel cracked open at the base and spilled dried millet across a pathway where no shoppers were gathered. Someone reached into the grains to help recover the sacks. What she found was another jaw. Not human this time. Narrower structure. Goat, perhaps. But the lower teeth had a strange curve, warped inward, as if grown over time to crush something that did not want to be eaten. The jaw had been boiled. It smelled faintly of cinnamon. One priest insisted on burning it near the hammam. The gears in the small water wheel turned faster during the fire, though the stream did not feed any more water that hour. The priest drowned 2 days later. No bruise. No broken skin. Just a red ring curling around his tongue. Soon, vendors discovered that white vinegar, long used to clean grain tools, had begun clouding when stirred with salt. It wasn't chemical. It was behavioral. The salts did not mix. Not output fog, nor distortion, just distance. The particle lines split in patterns that began to swirl wider each time the batch was stored. They formed gaps inside the fluid, soft, empty ellipses. When touched with fingers, the gaps closed, then reopened elsewhere. It began appearing on wood, on tools, on counters. Then it began appearing in bread. 2 bakers refused mass orders from caravans traveling toward the Mongol guarded east. They claimed the grain's warmth was wrong. The swell was too obedient. That when they opened the glazed dome of the oven, the surface of the bread rose too evenly, without separation, as though the crust grew not from heat, but instruction. One man in Hamadan sent his apprentice away before rolling his final batch alone. He did not finish. The oven was still cooling when he died, face flat on the ash cover, its back wall marked with a curl of script and soot. No handwriting could be matched to it. The inspector sent to settle the case opened a hanging rack to clear room for the corpse files. Inside one of the bread cloths was found a false bottom, dry packed with almond seed debris, and what appeared to be a fragment of jaw, shaped from dough and baked. No city declared alarm. No edict discussed it. But across towns, method changed. Bread was bought, yes, but families began tearing the loaf sideways instead of slicing down the middle. They inspected holes. They thinned the crust by steam. Never directly stated. Always done casually. Women took over kneading. Men stopped offering first bites. Even beggars began refusing second cuts, watching what was given, testing weight. And in certain districts, grains sold openly only after being washed with oil. Not to improve flavor. Not for storage. Only to test what waited in the starch. Because in one marketplace, a vendor cut a piece too quickly. He bit small. Chewed once. The fragment faded, and people stopped speaking of it. But no one bit carelessly again. Something had settled in the grain. It was a dry season. This is what the elders said first, as if asserting the correctness of the ritual would neutralize what followed. Yes, the prayers were uttered. Yes, the flint was struck clean. Yes, the oil was poured in the right lines, 3 bends around each ankle, a circle on the forehead, driftwood beneath the shoulder blades. Nothing had been neglected. All the rites required by local burial rule, and those adapted under Mongol supervision, were present and complete. But the bones would not darken. The fire rose and hissed at the start, full-throated and steady. Clothes dissolved. Skin blackened and cracked. Infections, if present, hissed out in moist jerks. The bodies, 6 in all, left no smell beyond the usual scorched sweetness. And yet 3 hours into the burning, when the burial porter swept the lower pit with a long-handled iron rake, he expected ash and weightless dust. What he uncovered were remains so intact, so smooth, so pale, they felt untouched by flame. Vertebrae were whole. Jaw structures pristine. Even the fine tips of scapulae sat untouched, as if clean but never scorched. He repeated the furnace. Reeded oil. Adjusted airflow. The bones remained the same. Smooth. Ivory-hued. Monastic in stillness. He did not report the finding. But the silence around the burial pyre grew visible within 2 weeks. Porters began requesting other posts. A new handler, sent in from Hamadan, burned his own prayer cloth when tasked with sifting the lower ash bed. Something beneath the kiln smelled of rosemary on the second lighting, then smelted wool. He left that night under false illness. An inspection was petitioned, not publicly, but through a scribe who had once belonged to the military quarter. He was sent to copy the weight tallies of the cremation site, to compare charcoal dosage and blister stone inventories against customary discharge. Of the 33 deaths processed that month, only 4 showed proper burn residue. The rest produced shells. Full rib lines. Encased skulls, so unmarked they could have been borrowed from cathedral ossuaries untouched by time or sun. No plague was suspected. No poison. The deaths were from causes common at the time: fever, age, hunger. Of these, not a single body showed proper bone damage. The inspector had no scientific claim to submit. The fire temperatures were consistent. The fuel was proven. The bone color was real. But still the bodies refused full dissolution. The ashes were too light. The remaining structures too shaped, as if the fire had been denied entry where it most wished to go. This was not limited to a single district. Reports emerged further north, first near Kahistan, then over the Jylland border, where a Hassani cleric refused to light the third night's pyre around battleground casualties, claiming he could already see their ghost weights still standing up behind the bodies. He was ignored at first, but peasants passing the burial ground 2 days later saw that the soil beneath the corpses had hardened to stone before the fire ever touched it. When cracked, the earth beneath was dry, without char, not blackened but gray-green, glassy in texture, like polished eggshell. In Gazna, a burial assistant found that 3 front teeth of a tribal elder lost in execution were still set in burnt flesh with gold-lined veins running down the enamel, as if the marrow had tried to resist expulsion. No one said the word curse, But several begin to question the ritual order itself, whether the flames truly left, or whether something else had stepped between pyre and soul. Eventually, a question arises, not of theology, of torsion. Why do the joints remain whole? Why are the metacarpals long and graceful, not splintered? Why are the hips sealed at rest, each fold natural? All this while skin rips, while blood vessels collapse, while air and fluid do what air and fluid must underheat. The answer, when offered quietly by a healer whose brothers had worked under the Ayurvedic scroll physicians of India, was this: the bones resist not only burning, but pose disruption, as if held in place, not frozen, not enchanted, but prepared, already embalmed in a spiritual shape that fire could not remold, as if someone else had pre-buried them, in an older kind of fire, too ancient to name. The question becomes not now, why bones remain. It becomes, who arranged their rest? Who settled the body before it fell? Who pressed the joints into courtesy? Who folded the body beneath ash before the heat could bake memory away? The answer implied is simple. They came as soldiers, and they died as effigies, too dignified for soot, too echoing for silence. In Ardabil, a small group of women begins sweeping their entrances with powdered brick, whispering that fire now displaces ghosts instead of consuming them. They offer soup to the ghosts by hiding fennel seeds beneath their daughters' pillows on nights of heavy wind. These are not mourning rites. These are preparatory acts for spirits already present. When met with old Mongol armor, weathered to rust, they kneel. Not for the warrior, for the breath sealed inside. By early summer, a deeper phenomenon begins to emerge. Dig crews uncover remains beside a bridge near Nishapur. They expect, as elsewhere, unmarked graves hurriedly stacked. What they find instead are chambered pits, 3 levels deep, 6 bodies arranged in perfect hierarchy, not embalmed, not wrapped, not chained, but placed. Laid with their dorsals aligned, heads arched slightly south, shoulders sloped as if bowed before rising. When their clavicles are washed, a print of preserved henna is found on one. Record keepers admit these bones are from undocumented time. The skulls are shaped longer at the base than standard step stock, but they bear no deformity, only mutation of age. A grace not seen, a lineage not charted. The decision is made to reseal the graves. They're marked without epitaph. Only one symbol, carved once into the stone wall before reburial. A seated tooth. Later that year in Tiflis, a court translator speaks openly of a word that appears increasingly in his translated dispatches from the East, Tulgur. Its exact form eludes him, but it appears between verbs, interrupts place names, rewrites definitions of the slain. In one report, it replaces the name of a commander whose army was erased. In another, it appears in the midst of a drinking inventory. He believes it denotes a kind of transition, death lived in advance. When he hears reports of bones unburned, he says nothing. But he removes his own father's bones from their family urn, buries them in water, and leaves children's toys there to mark the grave. No one asks why. But the neighbors send honey instead of salt. By the end of the year, fewer cities send their ashes southward. Stone houses retain the bones. Fire is thanked, but not summoned. Some begin entombing their dead in sand scented with juniper and almond, baking the earth in low hollows. A new funeral script emerges in the northern scroll towns, short, plain phrases spoken rapidly. No translation exists, only syllables. They mean nothing to outsiders. But the children learn them faster than expected, and always repeat them twice. Once before cleaning the body, and once after, out loud. Eyes averted, never with a name spoken, because the bones will not die until they are allowed to return, and the fire knows not to try anymore. In the summer of 1222, on the cusp of the solstice, the diplomatic packet was sealed in the northern quarter of Otrar, containing 4 properly inscribed communications bound for the southern border post of Kashgar. Standard exchange, 1 request for passage rights through settled pasture land, 1 list of tariffs agreed upon during winter, and 2 scrolls bearing encoded recommendations for escort fees due to reports of merchant theft along the Yarkand bypass. 3 of the scrolls were sealed with the red ink standard for intercity provincial exchange. 1 bore the green seal of military correspondence, light-pressed with a wedge-line signature customary for border governors under stress. Everything was in form. They were delivered under oath to a 3-camel company, supervised by Customs Officer Harun Bashir, whose ledger shows the date, the wax weights, the color, and who received the pouch. 3 men, none named in surviving dispatches, traveled outward under calm skies and dry air. Expected time to Kashgar, 12 days. When they arrived 11 days later, tired, gone, but without Dieter, the courier pouch still held 4 scrolls. And yet 5 letters were removed, each sealed correctly, each bearing province-specific stamps, each using the scribal hands common to Mongol court-trained calligraphers in Transoxiana. The extra letter bore symbols matching neither the outgoing records nor any of the established recipient departments. No one opened it. The governor did not read the text. It was placed in a shrine store while the others were processed. It was unwrapped 4 days later. The writing appeared black, thick, soaked into the parchment beyond recovery. Not bold, flooded. When laid flat under lamplight, the text was illegible except at a slant. The sidelining resembled poetic formatting, but one scribe insisted it was a river log, a navigational mapping of crosstown movements applied to a city that had no known topography. It referenced alleys and doors no one remembered, distances that did not match Kashgar's layout. The names inside were oddly descriptive, not people, but roles described in action. The Smooth Bringer, the Blood Seer, the Jar-Fed's son. Not curses, but positions in some unknown administrative network, as if taken from a court whose structure was rooted in another century. No author name appeared. No salutation. Yet a signature mark, a gliding figure 8 loop pressed into the edge of the folded cloth, did match an entry from a half-century-old tax grievance sent from Kandahar but never received. An archivist removed the scroll from circulation when his copying hand began reversing letters unconsciously, curling final syllables inward with a line curvature, no Persian dialect used. He destroyed his notes without being told. That signature mark reappeared again 3 weeks later in Balasagun, affixed to a sheepskin scroll that had surfaced not from any trade route, but from inside the dedication casing of a Sufi poet's second manuscript, which had been sealed for 20 years and opened only as part of a funeral reading. The audience fell silent not at the contents, but at the paper found inside it, folded not once, but twice in a fashion not used in secular texts. The ink did not spread. It stayed damp even after 4 days of dry preservation. They gave it no verdict. The burial proceeded. No verse from that manuscript was read aloud. Nothing further was written beneath the dedication table afterward. In Termez, several traders from the West report that letters are arriving they did not send. Answered letters, responding to questions they had not composed. The responses are detailed and correct in format. They refer to children by name, use nicknames consistent with spoken memory. But the letters bear no handwriting recognized by sender or receiver. One mentions a broken wrist that had never been written about. Another mentions tooth weight lost following a dream illness known only within the healer's inner circle, never described beyond prayer. The men stop writing altogether after that. They communicate only through livestock transfer numbers and bundle receipts. They sleep with coals in small bowls above head height, to break the scent that paper now carries when unexpected ink arrives. One merchant locks his writing tools in a cousin's sugar house and dictates only aloud, with no transcript. When he finds a response penned in his own idiom waiting under the eaves 3 days later, he purchases all the shaved goat skin from his region, rather than risk parchment travel again. The letter did not carry threat. It was a marriage condolence. But it arrived 1 week before his wife was taken by a fever no one else developed. The Chinese quarter in Herat begins tracking paper weight differentials between letters opened on first arrival and those left sealed for a week before inspection. They find several scrolls to be lighter when unopened for days, as if the longer untouched, the less present their mass becomes. But this trend reverses in 2 particular cases, where a letter gains weight although the paper has not been added to. The calligraphy multiplies. One of these scrolls, when peeled apart, splits along vertical fibers, revealing a second, inner layer that duplicates the opening line but shifts the meaning through re-angled vowels and the insertion of an invisible tone marker. The line originally read, "We confirm arrival to the ice house." In the inner lining shifted, it reads, "We are held within what once arrived to the house before ice." The difference is dismissed, but the scrolls are woven shut again and kept inside a shrine ward. By the following season, travelers report that messages left openly in Herat's main market are no longer read with urgency. Most are scanned, sniffed, then distanced from. Scent tests begin. If the ink smells of pressed fig leaf, it is considered local. But if it bears a faint odor of clove and chisel dust, an older smell, not modern, it is feared. Not because of its content, but because it began arriving inside rubbish bags, or sewn beneath carpet bindings, often not unrolled. Several contain nothing. One carries a single vertical brushstroke across an unlined sheet. Pure ink. When read aloud, the reader stops halfway, complaining of weight in the jaw. A merchant nearby says she tasted iron. The reader's lip splits later that day. With no cut made, names previously avoided begin rejoining letters. As if the war of horses and dust and sky have begun to plant memory into form. Scribes tasked with naming the dead begin inserting lines not from testimony, but from dreams. Entire sections of tribute ledgers are revised against the official spoken word. Those who correct the names fall sick soon after. One dies without explanation. His library finds a page where the Mongol strategy routes are sketched out in reverse, curling along the same paths not yet taken, and yet already marked with tribute symbols. A letter is sent from an abandoned village. The signature matches a spice merchant who had died 3 years earlier during the flight from Bokhara. It is addressed to an heir he never met, a boy not yet 2 when he passed. It contains 4 instructions: Paxall, burn no script, leave a space for breath, and keep west open. The handwriting is confirmed. The date impossible. But the seal bore 2 marks. One from his guild, the other from a court that dissolved before the Mongols ever crossed the Amu Darya. Within half a year of these reports, postal routes into Mongol-occupied zones begin showing behavior unfamiliar to official courier logs. Domesticated paths forget themselves. Riders arrive alongside duplicate parcels, both identical in form, different in length. Riders report that the 4th checkpoint moved 1 watchtower's width to the left, though no survey marks show it. Letters expected from the shaper appear in Marv with seals blurred into mirror shapes, as if printed underwater. A boy in Ray is handed a letter from a camel that would not move until it was unloaded. The scroll inside is addressed to the boy's name. The language inside is not Persian, nor Arabic, nor Mongolian, but the lines carry a rhythm his grandmother says she once heard from a man hanged for script theft along the Salt Road 40 years ago. No scholar can confirm the text, but when dried, the paper cracks open along existing lines, as if pre-folded for some secret translation process. Each crack reveals older text, older than the boy, older than the message. The surface had been written over. The real letter lies beneath. In the year 1258, after decades worth of Mongol advance and dozens of partial accounts packed into tribute records and withdrawal letters, the city of Baghdad entered its final season as a seat of the Abbasid Caliphate. But the siege that followed was no longer spoken of in terms of preparation, resistance, or even inevitability. It was framed instead through hesitation. Not because the Mongols had not arrived. They had, but because when they did, the reaction did not correspond to the scale of their presence. The Tigris still ran. The gates had not been breached. Disease had not broken morale. No trade embargo prevented supplies. The stars offered ordinary constellations. And yet, something within the ruling court shifted with unusual quiet. Not panic, not disorder, something far slower and internal. An undirected caution. A loss of loyalty to the city's own weight. Soldiers who had fasted ahead of the expected campaign withdrew to shelter before being summoned. Clockmakers stopped adjusting for time. Schools remained closed after a brief plague that never spread. Tents erected in the outer corners of the eastern gardens bore inscriptions tied to ancient Zoroastrian celebrations, left unfinished because the scrolls recording the rites began to vary in spelling by the day. Calligraphers tasked with preserving statewide proclamations erased the names of the caliph's father from the official genealogy chart, then denied doing so. Temple scribes found copied verses repeating of their own design, extra lines forming not from the quill, but from the damp patterns of drying ink caught under the window. The city knew, before its generals, what kind of war had finally surrounded it. Before Hulagu's siege formations had completed their arc around the river curvature, a musician at a side pavilion in a house of wisdom recorded a strange ash-blue echo while testing a reed pipe. She claimed the sound did not return at an angle, but rested above the stone well inside the central hall. For 1 full hour, her notes became circular. The sound had not reverberated. It had settled. Travelers from Basra recalled the same dissonance weeks earlier, just before reports arrived that trade ships crossing the lower Tigris had reached their ports early, their travel logs written ahead of inkbend. Some of those who read those logs claimed they saw their own handwriting there. Hulagu's army reached the perimeter of Baghdad's defenses in late January. By this time, merchants had already packed goods without buyers, and certain noble compounds left open their side entrances, not from surrender, but from a belief that the outcome had already occurred. City guards reported that signal fires extinguished themselves. Tools of signal and command, the brass horns, the tower flares, the loose call drums, failed to carry. Air thickened across the conduits placed between walls. Engineers stationed to monitor resonance from sylvan wind near the southern towers reported absolute stillness along base gates, even as riders were seen moving across the plain. There was no vibration. One officer recorded the phenomenon and submitted the phrase zero-tone travel into his battle log, then physically scraped out the pen line 3 hours later. He could not explain why. On the western fringe of the city, where the old irrigation arches met the last arc of palm gardens, an alley opened one width wider than known records. A bookseller who passed it with a mule described the scent of starch, ink, and softened earth. He noted the date trees shifting their shadow directions not once, but twice, first with solar light, then again just after. He took shelter inside the bookseller's lodge and waited. The alley shrank by morning. Only the books remained, arranged in a stack topped by a leaf whose plan of origin did not match the local flora. The pulp was still drying. The title of the uppermost book bore no inscription. He left it untouched. The siege had not yet begun, and already most of the ministries knew who would not resist. Pages hired to prepare official correspondence skipped vowels as if responding to an invisible spoken accent. Letters were rendered with thin breaks in the midbar, unrecognizable to any known sectarian orthography. Linguists tasked with processing these texts decided not to categorize them at all. A handful of scrolls were given to ulama with a gift of ancient Persian side-reading techniques. None were returned. When one of the curators asked for the documents the following week, he was told that no such scrolls had been issued. The record keepers had already replaced that registry with blank folio. What alarms the palace is not disappearance but convergence. Multiple people report seeing the same man pass the northeast archway twice under separate names. In both accounts, he is wearing mourning ribbons consistent with burial responsibilities, and both writers refer to him eating fruit tied to foreign tribute, a type of pear from Gansu not yet accepted in official Mongol distribution. Only one such trade card had ever arrived, nearly a year prior, and had been burned in quarantine due to mildew. Yet the fruit was described identically by 2 different court historians trained separately, hard beneath the tooth, but sticky before the skin was swallowed. Each claimed the man they saw was named after a river no longer marked on the outer maps. No outcry followed. No punishment was recorded. Only a quiet tug at the inner shape of time. The infection of foregone reality into daily ritual. Before bodies fell, conversations became irregular, not shaped by what had occurred, but what would be acknowledged in future memory. Even the libraries matched stories before war began. At the altar of Kaider, the scroll of defeated dynasties was read aloud the evening before declarations, and its final entry matched unit for unit the Mongol movement that was confirmed by scouts 3 days after. Yet that scout had not left on time, and his horse limped when no injury was ever seen. When Hulagu entered, it was not in conquest. It was through matching. Territory remembered the pressure before pressure was placed, and the bodies that resisted did not speak. Families emerged onto rooftops not to flee, but to pray for clarity. What part of the city existed before the siege, and what remained was hollowed out for and by its expectation. No coins were exchanged in these final days. It is noted in Tigris records that silk and preserved citron became the new trade medium, not for commerce, but for passage. Names on residential tax rolls disappeared from one column and reappeared in folklore. A child's ballad 2 months later would describe a fisherman eaten by a bird whose wings spelled ash in syllables known only to diviners. The song was written to match the meter of preparation songs used by Sogdian riders after sickness, never taught in this region. Survivors of Hulagu's entry reported no formal broadcast of victory. One said he saw a Mongol officer touch his helmet twice before turning away. Another recalled a general stopping at the old quarter's boundary line and simply facing the gates. What was known internally across the city and felt in the markets, the quarters, the elevated shrines, was that there had been no decisive act. Baghdad's physical boundaries remained intact, but something else pressed through its pattern that left decisions flavorless. The city accepted its emptiness. Those who lived in its windows emerged not as conquered, but as passed through, shifted, unwound. Some would leave. Others would remain as if no change had occurred. But everywhere, what passed for resistance had already been given away long before the walls were touched. And still, for 12 weeks after Hulagu's departure from the center, the lamps of Baghdad burned white schema, unshaded and uncandled, not for mourning, not for prayer. Just white. No wax residue in the basins below. No recall of who replaced them. Only dim bowls of clay, shaped into rooms that had no reason to remain lit. The structure was unrecorded. Not new, not unfinished, merely unmapped, as though it had arrived in quiet alignment with the years but had chosen to be unnoticed. A narrow cloister, constructed near the crest of a granite shelf west of Lake Savon, its opening no grander than a devotional hut. Dustless, though it had faced 3 winters, shaded, though beyond it no cypress had grown. The monks who lived in the higher monasteries had only begun referencing it after Esther Day prayers, in lowered tone, a place one passed, not entered. But one morning, a boy was found asleep beside the doorway. He could not recall how he arrived there, only that he had wandered with bread for the shepherd post, and before he reached the dividing stones, the world around him seemed to contract into haze. He remembered no sound, only the feeling of his chest tightening, not from fear or cold, but from something in the air that felt like it had already occurred. His palms were grain-glossed from carrying the loaf. Yet when he woke, they were clean, and the bread was gone. The monks brought him into the limestone dormitory, with rose oil warmed at the base of his bed. He could not speak for 3 days. When words returned, simple and disarranged, his descriptions bore no sense. He spoke of a voice behind heat, language made of spiral glass. Words that he said sounded backwards only when you tried to listen forward. A form without origin. No figure. No shade, but presence. Not behind the stone, beneath. Out of caution, the elder monk guild agreed to perform a silent observation. Not an exorcism, not a closing rite, just watchfulness. 6 monks climbed a path 2 days later with no weapon, only the old bell robe and cane. They remained near the threshold for 1 hour. They did not speak. They did not enter. When they returned, each carried a subtle bend in posture, as if a thin cord hung from the chest downward. The abbot asked no questions. They were assigned to prayer without psalter, and that night no chant was heard. They were not harmed nor ill. They simply no longer spoke. 4 weeks after, their silence was viewed with reverence. Students beneath them carried water without command. Doors opened before they approached. Their faces remained alert, not terrified, not shell-faced, only watchful from inside. But silence is not easy to sustain within a house of transcription. Eventually, a hesitation built inside the copying rooms, where younger scribes began lifting quills mid-verse and failing to remember where they had last placed the ink block. Some began reporting dreams not of the cloister itself, but of its grammar, constructed architecture without material, whole arches forming from intention, letters forming beneath it without hands. One novice scribe opened a codex 3 days later to find his own commentary written on a marginalia he had never touched. The ink was real, the fingers not his. He asked the abbot if the 6 monks had used his tool set at night. The abbot lifted a candle and said the tools were now beyond use. That evening, the drawer holding them burned. No other fire caught flame, only that drawer. Eventually, word of the cloister's transformation spread, not as a tale of danger, but of interference. Speech no longer held itself together around it. Travelers who passed by on foot began reporting moments of sudden tooth pressure, a sensation of breath holding without will. Traders unloading goods slowed their gestures, lifting bundles with the caution felt while listening to an unread letter. A post-courier from his rukn stated plainly, the horses would not walk past the eastern ridge near the site's entrance. They bent without force, legs angling away from the shadow as if it had shape. He tried to dismount and lead them. This time, the animals did not resist him, but they fell silent. For 3 days, no whinny, no breath at night. Within the next moon cycle, they died in the field. No wounds, no illness. Found flat against the earth in perfect parallel. None had moved. The courier reported that on the 3rd evening, he stood over one of the bodies and heard a phrase whispered somewhere between the ribs. Not wind. A phrase. It suggested genealogies unknown to him. Blood names that never belonged to his family, spoken like rebuke. He could not recall the words afterward. The memory left, and in its place he said he felt not emptiness, but repetition. A pattern stuck inside time. As odd events continued, it became evident this was no longer confined to a place. Silence began to imitate itself across language stations. One dispatch center reported 6 consecutive translators failing to carry out assignments in full. Each had progressed to within 4 lines of scroll completion before finding the phrasing subtly altered. Phrases like, he will not arrive as promised, replaced with, he has always arrived before promise. Most filled only half the parchment before setting down their inkstones and leaving the table. One did not speak again for a week. When she returned, she began to hum half lines from no known dialect, melodies fixed within intervals used in Armenian censer songs repurposed for burial. Another filled an entire page with a single symbol, repeated not in line, but in spiral. When she was told to stop, she blinked heavily, then asked what had become of her parents. Her parents had died 10 years earlier. She was not confused, only surprised that she hadn't remembered for so long. Farther west, in the ledger rooms of Kazvin, archivists began noticing that testimonies gathered in the course of siege documentation began removing the speaker. Passive voice, which had long been a formal tendency in historical updates, now began to dominate even personal letters. Witness statements arrived in full narrative form, absent of I or we, describing horror not through seeing but through shape, gesture, arrangement. It was as if people no longer perceived events through the boundary of their own memory, but through pattern. They recounted what had happened without taking ownership of how they had come to know. And the more this mode appeared in letters, the more the language around loss became peaceful but ruptured. Whole families recorded dead relatives without mourning words. Instead, they wrote of holes where sound used to live inside them. A merchant's widow wrote that air gathered around her ears for 7 days before the final moment that she ever spoke her husband's name. After that, she stopped handwriting altogether. And yet, notes in her handwriting appeared in her spice bags, rows of pricing written with perfect accuracy. She denied writing them. She began scalding her hands in steam baths before handling any scroll. Not from fear of ink, but fear that the rustling itself would begin to recall her. Not the other way around. The last record from that cloister arrived through a clay impression stuck onto a pine board carried overland to Bardsraven. It bore no parchment, but instead a strip of calfskin-dyed ivory. Impressed into its surface, not written, was a broken verse. A name sat at the center, not identified, perhaps only part of a name, and beneath it, 6 points marked in prayer cross fashion. Almost like the number of monks. None of them died. That had always seemed strange. The cloister had not harmed them, not in body. But as weeks passed, their silence became permanent, not mutinous, not swelling of the tongue, only that they would hear speech and respond with stillness, not disapproval, not absence, just a listening surface. Rituals continued, They served. They poured water. They walked in grace. But they never repeated what they had heard, because what they heard had never entered from the outside. They had heard something folded into time, and after that, no translation mattered. The shape of a sentence simply unraveled in front of them. They remain alive, but none of them ever said a word again. On the last crossing east of the Eerie River, the trail flattens into stone. Not gravel, not sand, but stone, as if the ground itself hardened in refusal before the final caravan passed. No elevation remains. No turn. Only a widening white sheet where the earth came smooth under boots that, by witness account, had not arrived by road. In the record of a provincial scribal assistant, recovered years later and stored in damp clay wrappers beside tax inventories, a single image is described: a line of Mongol riders ending their march as if returning not from war, but from winter itself. There had been no snowfall that season across the southern range. No frost in the hills. But the leather gaiters of the soldiers bore pale residual crystal, and their fingers left slight condensation on metalwork, as if rising up from a temperature not documented anywhere else in the region. The men were not weary, not weathered. They dismounted as if simply finishing a long conversation. None asked for rest. One tied his horse to a branch with no leaves remaining. Another rinsed his headscarf in a stream that had not flowed in a month, and for a moment, steam rose up from where the cloth entered water. No alarm followed. The locals did not resist. They did not open gates either. Instead, most homes remained empty, doors shut but not barred. Shoes left by hearths. Cooking stones warm, but meals uneaten, already salted for leaving. When the soldiers reached the end of the street, there was nothing to take. No one to command, no message to deliver. But they waited. And then they vanished, not in parade, not in flight, only gone. Their boot prints cut along the flat patches of sheep frost remained visible until dusk, then receded, not with melt, but as if drawn gradually down into ground. The imprint of a hoof lasted an hour longer than the mark of a man. 2 children later said they saw a canvas saddle discarded near the irrigation gate. It was clean, almost too clean. A rusted buckle lay beside it. But when elders arrived to inspect, the saddle was gone. One boy insisted long afterward that it had not been dropped. He said it was always there, too early, maybe centuries, waiting for someone who finally remembered to leave it behind. Some weeks later, in the records of one monastery far from the eastern steppe and never touched by scouts, a detail appears. Not a headline nor report, but a notation in the margin of a copyist's prayer. Their shadows lengthened differently, like they're counting dusk from the other side. In the same hand, lower down, is a second line written unevenly toward the edge of the page, just above the binding thread. The north wind no longer belongs to us. The copyist signs no name. Before winter ends, he is gone. Ashes never settle evenly in those towns. The dust that follows that march clings in corners and joint beams. Women wrap mirrors in cloth for protection, but the glass still clouds. Even in used ink begins to thicken in its pots overnight, congealing to a pitch color not typical of iron-based mixes. The paper it touches does not dry. Words bleed outward. Names lose shape. In firelit rooms, those who remain speak less. Not from fear, from effort. Everything must now be said twice to mean once. And before long, speech itself becomes quieted, words held just long enough to mark presence, then dismissed, as if names and news had become unworthy of sound. The Mongols do not return through these roads. The war moves far beyond, toward unknown foothills and lesser chronicles. But something deeper remains with the stone. Not occupation, not memory, only weight. A weight without anger or victory or motive. A stillness that knows it is past. Elsewhere, in hollows far from steppe and palace, people begin forgetting why the snow matters. They speak of cold from beneath the breath now, not above. They say the ground sometimes exhales in sleep. They bury horses standing up, and they leave small bowls of sugar beside door frames with no explanation. Not for appeasement, not for loss, only to let something rest. Once, a woman opens an old drawer and finds her son's name carved into the soft backwood where it had never been inscribed. The lines were fresh. He had drowned 5 years earlier. She says nothing, takes a wool cloth and wraps the drawer shut, then places it beneath her bed. That night, the air stays warmer. But there's frost beneath her pillow. Only a trace. Only once. She does not sleep facing the window again. There are no final records. No final breath. Just the slow folding of names into thresholds they once opened. The death counts do not always sum. The battlefields do not always mark. And often what's left in the official keeps is simply light, wrong-seeming reflection off old steel, warped longer as if remembering a man stretching too slowly to rise. Scribes put down their pages. The last to write anything does so without date, signature, or nation. The ink is brown, the parchment creased. One line tucked between herb recipes and salt blight listings. Nothing audible now. But the snow is back and the horses are no longer cold. In the months beyond the last horse, the riders, the letters, the breath, and the breath behind it, only silence begins to carry. Not heaviness, not mourning, just a gentle precision. The sound of closings, the feel of stone remembering how to hold its own name again without being spoken aloud. And beneath bedding across the high provinces of the interior, children fall asleep without songs, because the wind no longer hides its face. And sleep, if allowed to stay long enough, becomes the only thing too quiet for history to follow. If what we uncovered deserves to be remembered, make sure to subscribe and leave a comment, even a single word. That's how history survives. Have a good night. Sweet dreams.